I'm Indy Nidell, and this is Out of the Trenches, where I sit here in the chair of wisdom and answer your questions about the First World War. Bood the Dude asks, so his parents are Mr. and Mrs. Dude. His middle name is The. The is a fairly common nickname, like Jack the Ripper, Smokey the Bear, Bood the Dude. Okay, that's what they all have in common. That's what you have in common with Jack the Ripper. Same middle name. Love the show. I was hoping you could give me some more insight on John Barney Hines, the infamous British infantryman who looted off dead German soldiers. Is this all folk tales, or was he truly a legend? Thanks, and keep up the good work. John Hines, also known as Barney, served as an Australian soldier during the Great War from August 1915, although he really was only at the front from early 1917 to mid-1918 since he had pretty bad health. Anyhow, by the time he joined up, supposedly telling the army he was 28 years old, he was in reality 42 and had lived a life of odd jobs. He was a problem soldier, to say the least, and often got in trouble for drunkenness, for absence, even for forgery. But he was also a very aggressive and fearsome soldier. He was really tall, and he weighed 90 kilos, and that's like 200 pounds. He was simply good at killing and capturing Germans. But the picture that got him famous shows his favorite pastime activity: looting. The picture was taken September 27, 1917, one day after the Battle of Polygon Wood began. It shows Barney going through a huge amount of different German items and looking into the camera like the photograph interrupted him counting the money he took from the Germans. Now, looting or souveniring from dead or living soldiers was not uncommon. The Australians especially were infamous for doing this, and I'm sure that's going to get me a few comments right there, but what are you going to do? You can say that this was part of the war, though. They brought the stuff home as prizes or simply sold it to get some additional money. The souvenir king Barney, however, was pretty much obsessed over it. It is said that after he was discharged from the war, a lot of his amassed souvenirs he kept in a cabin at his home. The photograph itself became one of the best-known Australian war photographs, and every now and then, Barney would again be in the public eye. Laura J. asks, were there any attempts to improve the conditions of the prisoners who were captured early on in the war, since many had to stay there for years? Were they allowed to have sport programs or something similar to improve their health? One good, maybe even outstanding example were the efforts of the German Joseph Hubert Pilates, who was traveling through England as a boxer and circus artist before and during 1914, was even teaching self-defense to Scotland Yard. But as the war broke out, he was seen as just another enemy alien and interned in a prison on the Isle of Man. Although the prisons in England were less harsh in nature than a typical continental POW camp, the conditions were still bad, especially for the health of the prisoner, both physically and mentally. To combat the lethargy, Pilates began teaching his wisdom of body exercise to his fellow cellmates, and soon most of the prison was participating in his daily workout routines. Now, the prison did not have any workout equipment, so they had to rely on mattresses, bed frames, and headboards. Pilates turned that into resistance-based workout to get the muscles working again. He called it contrology, and many of his base principles were founded in those prison cells, and these, of course, are the basis for Pilates workouts today. There were similar cases in other camps where prisoners got together and formed workout groups. They were quite successful with it, but those could only flourish in sophisticated prisons and camps that were rather relaxed with their prisoners. Somewhat of a grim question. I read a poem called Suicide in the Trenches. I can only imagine that suicide in the First World War was somewhat commonplace due to the horrific circumstances the soldiers were exposed to. What were measures some of the nations took to prevent suicide? Was shell shock taken seriously enough for the men to be provided with therapy? Were there reparations to the soldier's pension or family? Suicide of soldiers has become a recent topic, with mostly the military researching the reasons for the very high numbers of veterans of recent conflicts taking their own lives after they return home. Historians in the past, however, have not taken that much interest in the topic, mostly due to the fact that research was pretty difficult. Suicides during the war were not really documented, and not all nations kept statistics of war-related suicides after the war. On the one hand, the suicide rate during the war goes significantly down in comparison with pre-war statistics. This seems agreeable to Émile Durkheim, a contemporary French sociologist, who states in his social theories that during wartime, men lose the feeling of being useless to society. They lose the egoistic and fatalistic outlook on life associated with social deviance, as they joined fellow soldiers in a meaningful fight, right? His theories are debated nowadays, especially in regards to the modern understanding of depression, but that could be a reason for why all nations were so underprepared for the mental problems of veterans. Canadian sources tell us that 40% of the suicides in 1919 were veterans, while French statistics are silent or speak of a decrease in suicide rates after the war. Post-traumatic stress disorder was widely unknown. And like with shell shock, suicidal veterans were not adequately treated. Also, their reasons were diverse. Suicide during their time in the trenches was usually associated with being unable to cope with the stress of battle, or that they were gripped by terror and fear of what was to come. So talking about it was pretty much a taboo, since that declared cowardice and weakness, and it was also bad for morale in general. Many men came back from the war with mental and physical scars, and they could not deal with civilian life. A disfigured face or missing legs, the memory of having friends blown to pieces right in front of you. Maybe your wife thought you were dead and had remarried by the time you came home. Maybe the war never left the soldier, you know? There's many reasons, but we only have a few statistics and diary entries and no larger studies. Suicidal thoughts and depression are, of course, not just a topic that the soldiers 100 years ago had to deal with. We've recently been contacted by a fan of ours, Blake. He and his family have been watching our show because Blake's brother had been telling everyone about our show. He developed a real passion for history and for the topic of the First World War in general. Unfortunately, that brother had also been hiding his depression from his family and took his own life. Blake asked us to make this story public in order to tell everyone out there that it does not have to be that way. If you are suffering from depression and suicidal thoughts, you don't need to go through that alone. We've put a few contacts for organizations that offer help in the video below. See you next time.